Yeah, I'm okay. Thanks, Damien. I'm just finished a couple of shifts there over the weekend, so just recovering before going back on nights tomorrow.
You're originally you're a St John's Park lady, Annette and Donal, your parents. Donal,
Yeah.
Councillor Donal Barry, and Annette, your mammy. You moved back to Glasgow in 2005. You've been there since, and you trained as a doctor and then a specialist in anaesthetics. Tell me, what is it like there, Laura, at the minute? You've branched off into intensive care. What's it been like?
Well, as you said, I've been working in intensive care now for the past 2 years. And obviously, since January, we were aware that this pandemic was coming our direction. And Glasgow, as you know, is quite densely populated, so we were expecting to have quite a number of patients come into our unit. So at the minute, we have probably quadrupled our work. We have a significant number of ventilated patients, which we would class as level 3 patients, and also a significant number of level 2 patients, which are patients requiring an intense amount of work but not necessarily needing a ventilator. It's busy. It's hard work. It's both physically and emotionally demanding. The days are long, and all the staff are pulling together and trying their best to get through this.
Do you have enough personal protection equipment, PPE, at present, Laura?
Yeah, I know this is something that we've seen in the news over and over again. And I feel very lucky. Where I am in Glasgow, we're in one of the biggest hospitals in the UK, in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Glasgow. And our training for this since January has been excellent. I really have to say that we are not short PPE. We have enough scrubs. We have enough of the visors that you see on TV. We have been fit tested appropriately for the mask. And every time I go into work, I feel very lucky that I'm in that situation, because daily we're hearing about hospitals up and down the country who are struggling to get the correct PPE. But thankfully, I'm not in that position, and we've been well looked after.
In terms of the practical and practicalities of this, just so that people can understand, when you put on this equipment, it takes you quite a while to put it on, because you have to be sure you're gowned up properly, and like simple little things like if you're in the PPE for an hour and you feel like you want to go to the toilet or you want to take a drink of water, what do you do then?
We have a plastic apron followed by a full-length gown. You then have 2 pairs of gloves on, which is difficult. It's difficult to do our job wearing 2 pairs of gloves. It requires an element of dexterity and skill. You need your hands all the time in intensive care, and wearing 2 pairs of gloves can be difficult. It's also quite hot, as you can imagine. On top of that, then, you have your mask, and the mask is exceptionally tight, and that's to make sure that there is a correct seal, that there's no particles escaping into that seal. And to do that, it's obviously very tight on your face. It's uncomfortable. It's hot. It sticks, into your skin. It cuts above your ears. It cuts on the bridge of your nose. And a lot of my colleagues, including myself, we've had, little dents appear on our noses, red marks on our faces, that we're now getting used to. But it's sore. It's not comfortable. And then on top of that, you have a visor which sits over your face. So all in all, it takes about 5 minutes to put on. And actually, the most important step is taking it off, because that's where you need to make sure that any virus particles that you may have been exposed to is taken off in a correct manner, and that you're ensuring that that goes directly and safely into a bin.
So like I said, if you need to take a break, what do you do? Do you have to literally take all that off, or do you try to...
Yeah.
Do you? Yeah. How long can you actually last in that protective gear? Like 2 hours, 3 hours?
Well, I suppose, to give you an idea, I was working on Sunday. We had a very, very busy sick unit. There was a lot happening. There is obviously a varied skill mix on the floor just now with nursing staff and physio. The patients themselves are very demanding. And so taking a break is you can't just simply decide to leave. And I did a 13-hour shift on Sunday, and I left the unit twice. in that period of time. I suppose there's two reasons. You don't actually have time to leave and go and eat or go to the bathroom or get a drink. You can't obviously break the seal of your mask when you're in the unit, so you can't drink when you're in the unit. And secondly, you're also quite conscious that you don't want to keep reusing the PPE. Because every time you leave, you do have to take it off, and therefore that means you need to put on a full set of PPE again. So I suppose there's an element that people are conscious about doing that also.
How do you cope with the mental stress, Laura? Like, you're well trained, you're highly qualified, you work on certain procedures, and your colleagues you depend on them and they depend on you, and you work fabulously as a team. And yet, this virus is a hidden killer, and it's just beside you. It's just outside of this protective. You might remember the Ready Brek ad where you have this protective layer. Like, it's there. Like, how do you deal with that? Because you hear of your colleagues, other colleagues dying.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, in intensive care, we do see death. We do see it, but this is different. And there's no way that you can, just become immune to it, especially just now. We're seeing a high proportion, sadly, of people dying of this virus. And it's tough. It's tough as a team. But what I would say is in intensive care, we're privileged to work so well as a team. We have, a great bond between us with the nurses and the doctors, the physios. And I suppose we carry the weight of it all between us. I personally have found it very hard, as I'm sure all my colleagues have, and I'm sure that applies to anyone working in the environment just now. I suppose you just have to take solace in the fact that, in a way, we're privileged because there's families out there who haven't had the opportunity to see their loved ones at the very end. We have been there at the end. And I suppose most people, I'm sure many families will take a huge comfort in that, knowing that we care, that it's hard, that we do find it emotional, and, that their loved ones have been looked after at the very end. And there has been people who've cared deeply about them, who've been looking after them for many days. And, anything that the families want to pass on, we have done. We've spoken to the patients, we've held their hands. The nurses have been absolutely amazing, as have the medical team. And I suppose that's the only way that I can look at it. We're privileged. We're privileged that, although it's very difficult, we are in that fortunate position that we can give comfort to families.
It's so sad, Laura, isn't it? Like, that you're there holding somebody's hand when he or she just takes their last breath.
Yeah, it is sad. And, I think in a way, when I leave work and I walk outside, and as the weather in Waterford is beautiful, it's beautiful here too, and you walk outside and it's so still. It's peaceful, the roads are quiet. And I can understand why the public or people who are not in that environment think, we need to get back to normal. The economy is suffering, which it is. But it's like a different world. It's like a different world. You walk outside and there's this air of stillness. And whilst the intensive care unit is very calm, there is a huge amount of sadness, and a lot of people working very, very, very hard night and day just now to try and get through this. How
do you cope with the worry that your relatives would have, that Mammy and Daddy would be on the phone to you and they'd be saying, and they'd be maybe more worried than you are because you know what you're doing to keep yourself safe. How do you deal with that on the phone?
Yeah, I mean, someone asked this during the week. Somebody was saying, "Do not worry about it," and I think I worry more that I would pass the virus on to somebody rather than myself getting it. And I know that sounds bizarre, but I suppose the way I look at it is, in intensive care, we're very well protected. We have been fortunate. And we are on, we hear the word frontline all the time, but in intensive care we are. We are surrounded by patients with, coronavirus. But we have to have belief that the PPE works and that we have been correctly fitted, and I just have to, assure them that I'm safe, I'm being well looked after, I'm eating well, trying to sleep when I'm off, and getting plenty of rest, and that's it. Really, there's not really, we're all equally exposed to this, and I suppose we just have to take the same precautions that everybody else does.
How are you doing?
I'm tired. I'm exhausted, actually, the last 2 days in particular. I was on for the weekend and it was busy. It was very, very, very busy. I'm sure you've seen on TV.
The insights in Britain, the BBC News and Channel 4 and ITV, like it takes 8 people to turn a patient over from his front or her front onto their back and things like that, or the other way around. Like, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, and over the weekend we had a number of patients who, what you just described is called pruning. And that in itself, as you just said, takes 8 people. And it's not simply a quick turn. As you know, it has to be done very carefully. And then sometimes the patient doesn't quite like being turned, and then you have to do a quick flip back onto their front again. And that can be very stressful, especially when patients are critically unwell. So the weekend, I feel absolutely dehydrated today. I've been trying to drink plenty of water over the last 2 days and try and get some rest and some fresh air. And our rota has changed dramatically. We're doing a 2-on, 2-off rota. So that's pretty demanding. 13-hour days and then, 2 days off. And then we're going from days to nights, nights to days, days to nights constantly. And unfortunately, I'm imagining that's going to go on until June or July.
Say a little hello to everybody here.
I'm sure that they're all listening at home in Waterford and enjoying the sunshine. So I'm very, very jealous. I keep getting pictures from Fenner and Stradbally of beautiful sunsets, and I'm in my flat in Glasgow. So I'm very jealous. And we were meant to be home for Easter. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But I am looking forward to coming home and seeing everybody and catching up. Miss them all very, very much.
Listen, Laura, mind yourself. Take care. Dr. Laura Barry.
No problem. Thanks very much, Damien.
It's a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks.